let's get ready to go. How's that look? Not too good. Oh, that doesn't work very well, does it? It's okay. We're gonna go anyway. Do 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 do. A hero for all our times. Okay, I'm gonna get started. This is Swap Meet, The Jawas Tale by Kevin J. Anderson. The sand crawler labeled up the long slope of golden sand that rippled with heat under the twin suns of Tatooine. The immense vehicle moved ahead at a moderate but inexorable rate. Its clanking tractor treads left parallel furrows on the virgin surface of the dune. Within a few hours, gusting sand whirls would erase the tracks and return the dune sea to its pristine state. The desert resisted all permanent change. Deep in the murky bowels of the sand crawler, in the cluttered engine rooms where throbbing power reactors pounded and echoed, Hectic labored with his Jawa clan members. From the depths of his hood, he sniffed the air, a veritable sauce of mingled odors. The engines smelled as if they were getting old again, lubricants spoiling, durasteel cogs wearing away. Humans and many other sentient creatures loathed the way Jawas smelled. Detecting only a stink made them turn up their noses. But Jawas derived an incredible amount of information from such smells. The health of their companions and what they had last eaten, their identity, maturity, status of arousal, excitement or boredom. Het Nikik jittered his concern. At any other time, the Jawa would have rushed to avert any potential breakdown, at least until they had unloaded their wares on a hapless customer. But today, the Jawas paid him little heed, too preoccupied with the impending swap meet, the annual gathering of all clans. They pushed the engine to its maximum capacity as the sandcrawler toiled across the dune sea to the traditional meeting place of the Jawa people. Het Nikik shook his head, his bright yellow eyes glowing in the dim shadows of his hood. The other Jawas would know he was annoyed and impatient from his scent. Het Nikik had odd ideas for a Jawa, and he told them to any who would listen. He enjoyed watching his clan brothers scurry around confused at the thought he placed in their heads, thoughts that perhaps the Jawas could do more than run and hide from persecution by the sand people, by the human moisture farmers, or worst of all, by the imperial stormtroopers who had decided that helpless Jawa forts made good practice targets for desert assaults. He wondered if someone else among all the Jawas had realized that Jawas were only weak because they chose to be weak. None of his people wanted to listen. Het Nikik turned back to the engines, tearing open an access panel and adjusting the delicate electronics. He found it amazing that the Jawas could use all their skills and imagination in a desperate fight to keep this ancient machine running. Yet they would do nothing to protect themselves or their property if some antagonist tried to take it. With the sound of a grating alarm signal, the Jawas in the engine room squealed with delight. Cinching tight his pungent brown robe, Het Nikik scurried after the others as they rushed for the lift platforms to the bridge observation deck. The old elevators groaned, overloaded with jabbering creatures. I'm going to take a pause now. Let's see if I am allowed to. I don't want to end. But I guess so. I guess I'm going to have to. I just don't know if the sound is going. Is the sound working? I haven't a clue. I'm going to end it and I'll transfer myself to the other room. In stream. Uh-oh. Hey. Does that have anything? Yes, I guess it is. Okay. I'm going back. With the sound of a grating alarm signal, the Jawas in the engine room squealed with delight. Cinching tight his pungent brown robe, Het Nikik scurried after the others as they rushed for the lift platforms to the bridge observation deck. The old elevators groaned, overloaded with the jabbering creatures. At the pinnacle of the great trapezoidal sandcrawler, 15 Jawa crew members clustered around the long, high, transparent steel window standing on the inverted spare parts, boxes to see. All during Tatooine's long double day, Jawa lookouts stood atop makeshift stools, gazing out upon the baked sands, looking for any scrap of metal or sign of sand people, or Imperial stormtroopers, or hostile smugglers. Upon glimpsing any potential threat, the pilot would serve in a different direction and increase speed, locking down blast doors and shuddering with fear, hoping that the adversary would not pursue them. Het Nikik never heard of a Kayat dragon striking something as big as a Jawa sandcrawler, but that did not stop the Jawas from living in terror. Now the other small hooded forms looked down upon the broad, bold valley among the dunes. Het Nikik elbowed his way to one of the overturned metal boxes so he could set up and look out across the gathering place. Though this was his third season as an adult on the scavenger hunts, Het Nikik still found the swap meet sight breathtaking. He started across the dazzling sand as the twin sun shone down on a swarm of sand crawlers like a herd of metallic beasts gathering in a circle. The vehicles looked similar, though over the decades, Jawa mechanics had attached modifications, subtle differences in armor and patchwork. Originally, the sandcrawlers had been huge ore haulers brought to Tatooine by hopeful human miners who had expected to make a fortune exploiting the baked wastelands. But the mineral content of Tatooine's desert was as bleak and unappealing as the landscape itself. The miners had abandoned their ore haulers, and the rodent-like Jawa scavengers had seized them and put them to use, wandering the dune sea and the Juneland wastes in search of scavengeable debris. After more than a century, the sandcrawler hulls had been oxidized to a dull brown and pitted by the abrasive desert winds. Their sandcrawler had arrived late, as Het Nikik had feared. 2 days ago, the pilot had taken them deep into a box-ended offshoot of Beggar's Canyon where the metal detectors had found a slight trace of something that might have been the framework of a crashed fighter's hull. But instead, they had found only a few girders rusted away to flakes of powder. The oxidized debris was worthless. But before the Jawas could leave the narrow canyon, an early season whirlwind had whipped up, trapping them in a blinding cyclone of sand and wind. Strapped to the walls of their living cubicles, the Jawas had waited for the storm to blow over and then used the powerful engines to plow through the drifted sand. Though they had arrived at the swap meet late, there still seemed to be a bustling business. Far below, other Jawas scurried about like insects, setting up the bazaar. It hoped he could still find something worthwhile to trade. Standing on their metal stools, the pilot and the chief lookouts called across to each other, discussing the final sandcrawler count. Itnikik calculated quickly with his darting yellow eyes and saw they were not the last to arrive. One of the other vehicles was missing. Some of the Jawas around him speculated on what misfortune might have overtaken their brethren, while others consoled themselves by pointing out that even if the goods had already been picked over, they would have a new batch to inspect when the final vehicle arrived. As the pilot guided the sandcrawler over the lip of the dunes to a switchback path down into a flat meeting area, the Jawas scurried back to their living cubicles to prep their own wares. His body weary beneath the heavy robes, Etnikik had no difficulty scrambling down 15 decks to reach the stuffy cubicles. Etnikik slept in an empty upright shipping pod, rectangular and scarred with corrosion, barely large enough to step inside and turn around. During sleeping cycles, he buckled himself to a wall and relaxed against the belt restraints where he could stare at his prized possessions, stashed in pockets, magnetic drawers, and field jars. Now he grabbed the accumulated credit chips and barter notes he had earned during their great scavenger hunt and darted toward the main egress doors. Faced with the magnitude of the great bazaar, the Jawas worked together as an efficient team. They had set up their merchandise dozens of times during the half-year trek, stopping at every moisture farmer's residence, every smuggler's den, even Jabba the Hutt's palace. Jawa didn't care what they sold their wares. Down in the bowels of the sandcrawler, Etnikik scurried among the merchandise, tweaking the barely functional droids and servo apparatus. Jawas had an instinctive feel for machinery and electronics, knowing how to get a piece of equipment functioning just well enough to sell it. Let the buyer beware. The deserts of Tatooine were a veritable graveyard of junk. The harsh planet had been the site of many galactic battles over the centuries, and the dry climate preserved all manner of debris from crashed ships and lost expeditions. Itnukik loved to fix and recondition broken things. Energized by his ability to bring wrecked machines back to life, he remembered when he and his clanmate and best friend, Jek Nikik, had stumbled upon a crashed fighter. The small fighter had blown up, leaving only fragments, nothing even a Jawa could salvage. But digging deeper, they had found the burned and tangled components of a droid, an E522 model assassin droid that had seemed hopelessly damaged. But he and Jetnikik vowed to fix it, secretly scrounging spare parts from the storehouses in the Jawa fortress. Their clan leader, Wimmatika, had suspected the two young boys were up to something and watched them closely. but that only made them more determined to succeed. Etnakik and his friend had spent months in a secret hideaway deep in the Badlands, piecing together tiny components and servo motors, adding new instruction sets. Finally, the assassin droid stood, emasculated of murderous programming, purged of all hunter seeker weapons and all initiative to cause violence. The E522 functioned perfectly, but as little more than an extremely powerful messenger droid. Het and Chekmiki had proudly displayed their triumph to Wimataka, who scolded the boys for such folly. No one would want to buy a reprogrammed assassin droid, he said. But Hetnikik could tell from the not quite controlled rush of scent that Wimatika also admired the young Jawa's brashness. Never again had Hetnikik believed common wisdom about what Jawas could not do. He and Chetnikik had surprised themselves by selling the repaired assassin droid to the tusk-faced Lady Valerian, Jabba the Hutt's chief rival on Tatooine, a very risky trade that bought them even more scolding from Wimataka. Lady Valerian was a tough customer, and the one time she had felt cheated, the only remains of the hapless Jawa traders were a few tattered brown cloaks found in the great pit of Krakoon, where the ferocious Sarlacc waited to devour anything that came within reach. Etnikik had no idea what had happened to their reprogrammed assassin droid, but since Lady Valerian had not come after them, he presumed the huge whipoid smuggler queen must have been satisfied. 2 years ago, Het and Chetnikik had been separated upon reaching their age of adulthood, sent out to do scavenger duty away from the Jawa fortress. In a few years, sandcrawler crews would swap clan groupings and arrange marriages, but for the time being, Etnikik saw his friend only during the annual swap meets. Now he had credit chips in his barter pouch. He had merchandise to trade, and he looked forward to seeing Chetnikik. Okay, it's time for me to go get a break. Oops. The sandcrawler ground to a halt in the demarcated area set aside for their clan subnuit. When the cargo doors opened, Jawa team scurried to haul out the repaired droids. Let me check sound real quick. Yeah, the sound's working. Okay, back to the book. Jawas bustled about setting up tables, awning credit display readers. Others gave a last burnish to the exoskeletons of clanking mechanical servants. A few tried to look nondescript, hiding emergency repair kits inside their cloaks in the event their wares unexpectedly stopped functioning before a sale could be confirmed. Power droids lumbered down a ramp, little more than box-like batteries walking on two accordionated legs. Harvester droids and evaporator components were set up and displayed. Jawa salesmen took their positions, claiming the quality of their wares. A few lucky ones rushed off to be the first to snoop among the items for sale or trade by other clans. Around the perimeter of the rendezvous flat, Jawa sentries stood with image enhancers and macro binoculars searching for any sign of approaching threat. At the slightest suspicious sign, the Jawa clans would pack up their wares in a flash to vanish into the endless dune wilderness. Etnikik looked around but could not locate Jack's sandcrawler. After finishing setup procedures, he took his turn to look at the other wares. In the bustling melee, he smelled the steaming sweet scents of hundreds of Jawas keyed up with excitement. He felt the baking sun's heat on his brown cloak. He heard the cacophony of squeaking voices, the rumble of sandcrawler engines, electronic motors ratcheted and choked, missing beats until Jawa mechanics did quick fixes in hopes that none of the potential customers would notice. He wandered among the hucksters' tables, his excitement soured by the fact that Jack's sandcrawler was not here. Etnikik saw his clan leader, old Wimatika, discussing something in hushed tones with the clan leader from an outlying Jawa fortress near the human settlement of Bestine. Etnikik could smell the concern, the fear, indecision. Wimatika was so alarmed, he didn't even try to mask his odors. Etnikik sensed bad news. Wimatika was whispering for fear of sending the rest of the Jawas in a panicked flight. With a feeling of dread, Etnikik drove back to his impulse to run back to the security of the sandcrawler and pushed forward to interrupt Wimatika. "What is it, clan leader?" he asked. "Do you have news of the last sandcrawler?" Wimatika looked at him in surprise, and the other clan leader chitted in annoyance. Normal protocol among Jawas held that younger members did not approach their clan leaders directly, but went through a labyrinth of family connections, passing a message up through higher and higher relations until it finally reached its target. Answers came back down through a similarly circuitous route, but Etnikik had a reputation for sidestepping the rules. Clan leader Ekta was telling me of a Tuscan attack on one of his clan's fortresses, Wimateki said. The Sand People broke in and attacked before the Jawas managed to flee. Our brethren will never return to their ancestral home. They lost all possessions except what they could throw into the sandcrawler. Etnikik was appalled. If the Jawas were inside their fortress, did they not fight? Why did they just flee? Jawas do not fight, Teneka said. We are too weak. Because they don't try, Etnikik said, feeling his temper rise. His body carried his anger to both clan leaders. We'd have been slaughtered, Etpata insisted. Jawas are too small, Wimatika said. Sand people are too warlike, the old clan leader turned to the other, dismissing Etnikik. This young one has a reputation for speaking without thinking. We can only hope his wisdom will grow with age. Etnikik swallowed his outrage and pushed an answer to the question that concerned him most. What about my clan brother Etnikik? Where is the last sandcrawler? Winneteki shook his head so that his head jerked from side to side. We've lost all contact with them. They sent no explanation of their delay. We are concerned. Perhaps the Sand People attacked them too. Okay, I think I'm tired of this. Okay, I'm going to end it.